in my gut. Put a big smile on my face. Pull back my chin. Well, thank you all for coming today. It's really wonderful to see you all. My apologies about last time. I was called away from the island for a personal matter, and so I gave my talk via pre-recorded video. And I hope you were able to see that. I talked a little bit about this rotation here and another project, but here I am in person, so after I'm done talking, or even maybe while I'm talking, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer them. I am really thrilled to see this rotation up on the walls. This has been 5 years in the making, and to be honest, I originally planned to present this 5 years ago as a part of a larger exhibition that dealt with women's Japanese women artists, contemporary artists, working in the field of manga, and talking about issues of gender and civil rights and stuff. And at the time, I had framed the wording of that exhibition in a very dramatic way. For example, the subtitle of the show was How Japanese Women Revolutionized Manga. And my reason for including such words like revolutionized was because at the time I felt that there was, both in the United States and throughout the world, quite a gender battle that was happening. And I saw this artwork as reflective of that gender battle. And unfortunately, the big show and this connected rotation were canceled. And I think part of the reason why was because there was a sense that I was over-dramatizing it. I think people were thinking that, like when I talked in the exhibition about reproductive rights being in danger and stuff, people were saying, don't be silly. Look where we are now today. So that's one context. I'm just glad that we're able to show this finally, and we're getting back to talking about these serious issues. That's one context in which we can place this rotation. Another context is this is the 15th installment in a series of rotations in which I talk about the development of Japanese woodblock prints as a medium. We began this discussion back in October of 2021 with Buddhist prints from the 16th century. We then talked about the concept of ukiyo-e, prints from the floating world, and the first artist to use that term, Hishikawa Moronobu. In the 18th century, we talked about innovations such as the introduction of full-color printmaking and the prints of Suzuki Harunobu. We talked about the introduction of portraiture by artists such as Utamaro and Shadaku. Getting into the early 19th century, there was an exploration of different genres like landscape art by Hokusai and Hiroshige. In the late 19th century, there were prints that dealt with more dramatic themes like the warrior prints of Utagawa Kuniyoshi or the kabuki theater prints of Utagawa Kunisada. And welcome finally to the 20th century, where we see, oh my gosh, there's so much that has changed in Japan in general and in the field of ukiyo-e at this time. So forget about all of those previous rotations. What you're looking at here is a totally different world. Japan is now no longer diplomatically isolated from the rest of the world. That ended around the 1850s when Commodore Perry from the US Navy entered the port of Yokohama and said, you are now ordered to open up your ports to international trade or else, and Japan complied. There were advantages and disadvantages to opening up these relations. One obvious advantage was Japan had this sudden wave of new technology from around the world, including, for example, gas and electricity to light the streets of Tokyo and other cities. There were new artistic innovations or innovations from other countries that were imported in the field of woodblock printmaking, for example, various synthetic dyes. Actually, those had been creeping into the country for quite a long time, and a while ago Alejandra and I actually gave a talk about how one of those dyes, which we refer to commonly as Berlin blue, was used by Hokusai in his print of the Great Wave off the coast of Kanagawa, and that was long before Japan opened up its ports. But at this time, at the turn of the 20th century, you see a flood of synthetic dyes coming into the country and being used by print artists. And so many woodblock prints from this time period have this garish color scheme. And you may remember a couple of years ago I did a rotation regarding those Meiji period prints, and they are a very different aesthetic. I would not classify them as ugly or anything like that. They're just very different. It's like, you remember when neon colors were introduced to our color palette not too long ago. Artists didn't know how to incorporate these new colors into their pre-existing palette, and so prints looked kind of funky for a while, except for very conservative artists who refrained from the use of those new colors. And actually, Ikeda Shōen is one such artist. Let me mention a third context in which this show fits, and the most important context, which is my collaboration with Alejandra and the Mary Cassatt exhibition here. When I talk about Japan entering this period of international trade and international collaboration, it is clearly reflected in international art. So part of Alejandra's exhibition talks about how Mary Cassatt was directly influenced by Japanese prints. She went to an exhibition at l'École des Beaux-Arts in, when was it?
1890.
1890, thank you. I'm terrible at dates like that. But at that time, Paris was getting a hold of lots of different Japanese prints, particularly classical ukiyo-e prints by the artists who I just mentioned a moment ago. And there was this surge of interest throughout Paris and really throughout the world about those about Japanese prints. Mary Cassatt, who I believe was born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, traveled to Paris.
She was born closer to Pittsburgh. She went to school in Philadelphia.
Oh,
that's right.
Wonderful. Thank you for letting me know that. No, I really appreciate that. Pittsburgh's a wonderful city as well. I don't want to overlook their importance. But anyway, she traveled to Paris as I believe the only American member of the Impressionist movement, as it was considered at that time. She visited Paris and saw that exhibition, saw prints. I don't think she saw the works of Ikeda Shōen at that time. No, because they didn't exist, at least these didn't. These were mostly done in 1906, about 16 years later. But the connection, I suppose, is obvious. Kind of diametrically opposite in some ways, but very similar in other ways. Two female artists who were strongly influenced by the aesthetics of another culture, and who finally had an opportunity to get their artwork seen by people and recognized and critically acclaimed. I think that Mary Cassatt has really captured the hearts of people throughout the world. Ikeda Shōen is still in the process of being recognized, but I want to say that she's not the only Japanese female artist. She's definitely not the first. In the freestanding case here, I have examples of two female predecessors, and we have several female painters in our collection as well, who I simply couldn't fit into this rotation. But these artists here, including Katsushika Hokusai's daughter, whose name is pronounced in a few different ways. Oe is the way that I tend to refer to her, Katsushika Oe. You may have heard the term Ms. Hokusai. There was an animated film that came out a few years ago that's based on a Japanese manga, incidentally a manga written and illustrated by a female artist who is in this other show that I was talking about, but a very important artist in Japanese history. But anyways, back to this third context here. Yeah. These artists, Kasat and Shōen, are really sort of mirroring one another on opposite sides of the world, and showing how I think their fame is largely due to the new women's movement. I'm getting a little bit out of my depths here, and I might want to ask Ale to contribute to this if you have anything you wanted to say. But around this time, really throughout the world, the new women's movement, as it was referred to, was the first multinational feminist movement. It was a campaign for suffrage, women's right to vote, and opportunities for women to have various civil rights, which fortunately over the following several decades they largely achieved. We largely achieved, I should say, in a more embracing way as a society. We improved a lot.
So I wouldn't want to say anything about Japanese friends because Stephen knows significantly more. So I'm going to stay kind of in my camp with Kasat, and Stephen has been teaching me about some of these prints. We've included some, not Ikeda, but other prints, as Stephen so well said, into the Kasat show to be able to illustrate how striking it was for Kasat to see those prints and how she, I would actually use the word revolutionized Western printmaking based on what she saw in Japan. But in terms of women's liberties, although Kasat spent the majority of her adult life after studying in Philadelphia, she went and spent the majority of her life in Paris. She finished her studies there, joined the Independents, who eventually we get to know as the Impressionists. She was always very vocal about women's rights, and towards the end of her life, when she lost her sight and couldn't paint anymore, in fact came back for a longer period of time to the US and supported the suffrage movement. She wasn't necessarily a suffragette, but she was supporting the suffragettes, and she did. Was that?
Yes, that's wonderful. That's so great, and I really appreciate your adding to the information. I really am out of my depths here.
As am I with you, which is why it's good to
we're
share.
We're learning together.
Yeah, but she was also just to. How to talk about Kasat in terms of herself. I don't want to overestimate kind of what she did in that field, but there is something that I see with very little knowledge as a parallel with Ikeda Shōen, which is Kasat is taking as her subject females, women, and children. She is doing this in part because she does believe there is value in this subject. She is also doing it because she is constrained, given her class, into what she can be showing. So she's interested in what the Impressionists are doing, but she can't be painting cafes and cabarets. She has to maintain the dignity of her somewhat high-class family. So she is taking the subject of what she can see, of the spaces which she can occupy comfortably, but also within this giving a new type of dignity and a different eye to the way she is portraying women. And that is part of kind of this whole wave of giving more value to the female within society, both outside the home and really within the boundaries of their home. I'm good.
Thank you, thank you. It's really fascinating to see the similarities and differences between these two artists. Now, that I wanted to point out one really interesting difference, or I should say maybe an addition to the motives and reasons why Ikeda Shōen was working with this particular subject matter. She was not only making prints of adult women and younger women because this was the world that she knew personally and intimately. It was also because this was the genre of woodblock printmaking that she had been trained to do. What I mean by that is that I mentioned in the introduction here that she was a woman who was surrounded by male artists at the time. Her husband was a famous ukiyo-e artist. Her teacher was a male teacher. And this morning I was wondering, well, what kind of works did they do? So I Googled them. Surprise, they all did portraits of women as well. The subject of bijinga, portraits of beautiful women, you have seen that theme shown in this gallery by male artists exclusively numerous times, right? The works of Suzuki Harunobu, the first multi-block printmaker, for example. Or Utamaro, the portraitist who I mentioned. Most of his portraits were images of women living in the Yoshiwara brothel district. So Ikeda Shōen was doing these images partly because it was the field of printmaking that was really popular at that time. And why was it popular? This is something I was asking myself this morning, and I came up with a very cynical, very dark answer that I'm afraid I'm going to share with you right now. I want to put this rotation in a really positive context and say that this is a time of the new women's movement, which, by the way, in Japan was known as the modern girl movement, or moga, if you use the portmanteau that you often hear in Japanese. They truncate the words. I would like to say that her prints are reflecting that social advancement of women. I think, though, that it is also used as war propaganda. What do I mean by that? With the exception of this print, the rest of the prints in this gallery were published in 1906. From 1904 to 1905, Japan was embroiled in the Russo-Japanese War. From 1894 to 1895, Japan was involved with the first Sino-Japanese War. These wars were not simple isolated incidents. They were part of Japan's overarching colonialist strategy. They saw the US Navy come into their ports and say, we are ordering you to trade with us. And they felt threatened. And in reaction, they realized that they ought to try doing something similarly aggressive with their neighboring countries. Whether that was a wise decision or not, we can debate about, but that was what they decided to do. And so many artists at this time, in fact, one of the few remaining uses of woodblock prints at this time in the early 20th century was war propaganda, battle scenes, which were used to illustrate newspapers, another new invention, or innovation I should say, yet it's needless to say that if you flood the world with images of battle scenes, you will end up looking like an extremely militant country. And of course, Japan wanted to show itself simultaneously as extremely culturally refined and gentle. And so, alongside these battle scenes, there was a surge of images of bijinga, images of very peaceful women going about their daily lives and showing the peacefulness and the restraint that Japan wanted the world to know it for. Ale.
That was fascinating. I didn't know that. I was going to move back to a question before, so I want to make sure you're done.
Sure.
Okay. So, of course, Impressionists are also showing images of females. Cassatt's closest friend, Degas, is showing just post-pubescent women, he's famous for it, who are they're ballet dancers. Ballet dancers are from lower classes, and part of, during this time, their relationship with society actually happens to be highly sexualized. So I guess the difference, and I'd be interested in knowing how the difference is between what Ikeda Shōen shows and what the other males show, is that Cassatt is showing women in a very non-sexualized way. And the other part, which I think happens here too, and you mentioned it, is she is surrounded by male artists, and what I'm understanding, but correct me if I'm wrong, is she's a professional artist within all these males. I think I was not kind of very explicit when I mentioned that that is the other thing that Cassatt is very interested in. She values herself for being a professional artist, and although she's showing women in this kind of dignified working way, she distinguishes her professional, or her status as a professional, from the women she is illustrating.
This is so great, the way we're able to bounce back and forth between cultures and talk about the contrasts and similarities going on at this time. Japan is very different, in a very different situation in terms of depictions of sexuality. As I talked about in a series of shows about a decade ago, Japan has a long history of erotic art, and it was a proud history because the sense sense of shame that is often connected with erotic art or discussions of sexuality in general is often connected to religion, particularly Christianity. And for 250 years, Christianity was outlawed in Japan. That sense of shame was not nearly as intense as a result. And it was only after the American Navy came in, opened up the country, and began these diplomatic negotiations with Japan that the very self-conscious rulers of Japan began to understand Victorian ideas about sexuality. And they were very quick to outlaw erotic art within their own country. So around this time, or maybe definitely within Ikeda Shōen's lifetime, shunga, as we referred to it, or erotic art in Japan, was strictly outlawed by the government, and artists were imprisoned or fined very heavily for trying to produce it. And so while you may see images of women working in brothel districts or places in the sex industry, in Japanese prints for about 200 years, previous to this time period, suddenly images of women were exclusively devoid of references to sexual activity. And women were shown as very pure, however you wish to define that term. But it is a reflection of the Japanese government's taking the Victorian morality and adhering to it very strictly. So there's a big contrast there. Then, you know, it would be decades before Japanese artists felt comfortable exploring issues of sexuality in public again. That would not happen until the mid or late 20th century. And then, interestingly, nowadays there is suddenly another clamp down on discussions of sexuality in Japanese media. How are we doing on time?
It's about 9:40. So
Okay.
about 20 minutes.
About 20 more minutes. Let me see what more I have to say here before we open it up to a Q&A.
Stephen, while you're doing that, I noticed, I was just looking around, I don't see any men in these.
Don't say what?
Any men. in
Yeah,
any of these
there
pictures.
aren't
Same
any.
things. Almost true.
And yeah, that would be a really good thing for me to talk about. I should put this down here, should I? One aspect, I think I might have mentioned it in that video I sent you guys last month, but Ikeda Shōen's prints show a world of what we call, what was the term that I used? Homosociality. I love that term. It means there aren't any guys. Or it means there's only one, a depiction of only one gender.
Well, then.
It's kind of a view, it goes beyond Ikeda Shōen's prints, and it's something you find throughout what I refer to as shoujo bunka, or young women's culture, which was a new sort of subculture that developed in Japan around this time. If the term shoujo sounds familiar, it means young woman or girl. And in the field of manga, you will hear about shoujo manga, comics that are made for and about young women, often by female artists. Nowadays, that was the beginning of comics that were made about women in general. Nowadays, there's an additional subgenre called josei manga, which is comics for, about, and by adult women. And it's interesting that the comics about young women, adolescent women, came first. And it was only later on that comics dared to explore the world of adult women. I suppose partly in connection with what I was talking about a moment ago, partly because one of those subjects of adult women is sexuality. And it took a while for the Japanese art world to prepare itself to discuss that subject again. But nowadays, we can talk about sexuality from the point of view of a woman. So it's actually quite different than what had happened during the Edo period. But anyways, back to homosociality. This is a world that is uncomplicated by gender relationships. It's a world where women don't need to feel uncomfortable in the presence of male authority figures. It's a world where women can feel free to express themselves and communicate with each other. It's an idealized world. And you might compare it to some discussions I heard in the news recently talk about how women in South Korea and other parts of the world, women are talking about no longer dating men. There's a certain term for it, and I'm blanking on it. If any of you know it, feel free to let me know. But it's basically in response to this gender war that's happening right now in real time, and the way that women's rights are being cut away. Some women are reacting by saying, okay, guys, if you're going to treat us this way, then forget about dating, which is pretty interesting. but this,
4B?
pardon?
Yeah.
4B.
4B, like
4B, yes, thank you. The 4B movement. Feel free to Google that and learn more about it, because it is connected in, loosely to this idea of homosociality. Another person who I wanted to mention in connection with that concept is an author whose name I neglected to write down and remind to myself. But during that video that I showed you guys last month, gosh, what's her name again?
Is it Yoshia Nobuko?
Thank you so
That's the
much.
one that I went to look at that.
Thank you so much, yeah.
Yoshia
Nobuko. She actually published her short stories a little while after Ikeda Shōen. I think she was popular during the 1920s and 1930s. But she was pre-war. And in a recent anthology of her work translated into English that I came across, it might be the very book that
Yellow
you
Rose
found.
or something like that?
Yes. The cover illustration. Guess which artist the editor chose to use for the cover illustration? Ikeda Shōen. And it's perfect because Yoshia Nobuko, her name Yoshia, Y-O-S-H-I-Y-A, Yoshia Nobuko. She writes these short stories about female-female relationships. Often those relationships are platonic. Sometimes they are romantic. I'm going to move here, pardon me here. I'm going to go over to this print. This is a time when the Japanese government mandated that women have compulsory education, that both young men and young women attend school for at least, I believe it was 6 years. And they were doing that because this was becoming the standard throughout the world, right? In the United States and in Europe as well. And it was the first time that women had the opportunity to attend school. At the time, for middle and upper class women, a lot of those schools were, what do you say? Segregated? There were schools for boys and schools for girls.
Or co-ed.
They were not
They were not co-ed. So a lot of these women, like the women in this particular print here, you can tell that they're students because they're wearing hakama. Hakama is a kind of kimono that traditionally had only been worn by men. But around this time period, women started to wear it, and it designated them as students. So we know that these women are either going to or returning home from school, or maybe they're at a boarding school like what I'm talking about, and they're just taking an evening stroll. But at such boarding schools, it's basically a homosocial world, right? And so these relationships, these intense friendships, also casual friendships, but also intense friendships, and even romantic relationships between women developed. And so Yoshia Nobuko's short stories deal with that topic. I think it's fascinating. It sort of answers the question, what would it be like if you had a society where there wasn't this sort of power politics between genders, this very imbalanced distribution of power. And what if people were able to enter into different kinds of relationships without worrying about that imbalance of power? So check out her short stories if you want. Yellow Rose, I believe, is the one that's available in English. And actually, we have this freestanding case right here. In the version of this rotation that I was envisioning, guess what I was going to show in this case? I was going to put the book Yellow Rose, and I was going to have an iPad that you could scroll through to read the various stories. And I'm so sorry that I wasn't able to do that this time. But I'm hoping one of my little hidden agendas of this presentation is that I can get all of your support for putting together this women's manga exhibition sometime in the future. So, yes?
I was just going to ask you, why is her name like a German name, last name?
Shōen.
Oh, Shōen. That is one of the beautiful little chances that some words in languages sound like one another. Shōen is, I believe, Shō, I believe, is the alternate reading for Matsu, which is pine, and En is garden. So it's a very Japanese name. So some of our Japanese speaking docents might, if I mistook the kanji for Shōen, please let me know. Yeah, it's a very Japanese name. Not terribly popular, but very Japanese.
We were talking about class in Kasat, and I noticed that the ones I've seen, the women are beautiful here, and I'm wondering if depicting upper class women is part of Shōen's intent, and what's the political purpose? You said there's a political purpose behind this, to show peaceful, beautiful women? In contrast to the kind of militarism that you saw in other prints. During wartime, the entire population is mobilized. All artists are mobilized to communicate to the public some sort of a message. And while most male artists are involved in showing battle scenes and informing the public about how the Japanese army is making great progress and achieving these noble goals. At the same time, other artists, not just female artists, but male artists like Ikeda Shōen's husband and teacher were depicting other parts of Japanese life.
that were extremely peaceful and nurturing and stable. And that's how I think these prints can be seen as political. There was a comment you made a couple of months ago about how the Asian galleries don't deal so much with thorny politics. This is going to be an exception here. I hope you enjoy it.
Is there a class issue going on here?
Pardon?
Is there a class issue going
Definitely,
on?
always. I'd say in any rotation here, there are class issues. Often, when we're talking about ukiyo-e, we're talking specifically about what we refer to as the middle class. That's kind of a dubious term because there wasn't like a really clearly defined middle class in Edo period Japan. The merchant class is what we often refer to the Chōen, who were once Japan ended its civil war and the military government ensured a sort of domestic peace, that suddenly people could travel from one city to another and exchange goods, and those merchants were suddenly becoming wealthy and able to buy art, and in reaction, print artists realized that if they made images that reflected the interests of these merchants, then they could sell more. There are always these sort of devious money-making reasons. So when we talk about ukiyo-e as an artistic movement in Japan, it's really talking about images made for these merchants and their interests. And sometimes you'll see images of political figures or aristocrats like from the world of Genji. Usually they're historical images from the Heian period, princes and princesses. But there are different classes. During that time period, it was ironic because you had these images of noble figures acting like they were middle class, semi-educated guys. And they were very, in very high positions of society, but they were acting in less sophisticated ways. And that's because these were images that were intended for middle class, largely male audience.
These prints, these are just one of many, right? Like they've been printed and put in like books or magazines or...
Right. Before I answer that, let me conclude my thought here. Getting back to Ikeda Shōen, this is a time when, in the early 20th century, we have a new audience, and that is women. These prints were often made as frontispieces, what we call kuchie, for books or magazines that were designed specifically for female readers. The stories in those books, they were often anthologies of short stories. They were often romances, like Harlequin novels. And it's interesting how, even if it's a totally different country, different culture, young women like to read romance stories. And so that was, one usage of these prints. Upper middle class or middle class women, and yeah, prints were still considered bourgeois. I'm sorry, they were still considered proletariat art. And so upper class men and women still kind of ignored them. They would continue to do so until about the middle of the 20th century. In a couple of months, I'll tell you more about that change. But at this time, yeah, they might envision women who are upper class. These figures we're looking at here may very well be upper class women, but the folks who are buying them are probably middle or upper middle class.
Stephen, we don't have too much time left. Could you really quickly go over the significance of the series and why this one is the only one not a part of that series?
Sure. Okay, let's see. So we have 2 copies of the Thick Mist series. And all of the prints here, with the exception of the one on the wall here, are from the Thick Mist series. Yai Kasumi is the Japanese title for the series. Ikeda Shōen made it at the age of 20, a few years before she died of tuberculosis at the age of 25. Heartbreaking, isn't it? I'm sorry, that sounded cold. It's true, it's heartbreaking.
She died at the age of 31.
Yeah,
31, pardon me. Okay, I screwed that up. Everything else that I told you was true. I confessed earlier on that I'm really bad with numbers, and so this was the second example of that. 31. But tuberculosis is correct. Yeah, she died
Young.
tragically young, and particularly tragic because she was obviously extremely talented. But this series, which is considered, she was also a painter, and she made some amazing paintings. One of which I should mention was added to the collection of the Tokyo National Museum, I believe. You'll see it on their website. It's this fabulous 6-panel folding screen. Of course, the images are, again, portraits of women. But among her woodblock prints, this is considered to be her masterpiece. And I usually avoid that term masterpiece because it's a very, very gendered term. When you hear the term master, people always imagine a man. Well, Ikeda Shōen was a master of her craft, and this is her masterpiece, this series. So I'm making an exception here. This print on this wall here is the only one not from that series, and it shows her later style. She had moved into something that was a little bit less realistic, a little bit more stylized. You can see there were trends in the depiction of women at this time, and you can see how she's being influenced by some other Japanese artists. But this show is mostly a celebration of this series, Thick Mist. And I love that title because, as I was mentioning to one of you before I started talking, that idea, Yai Kasumi, we translated it as thick mist, but another, maybe more accurate translation would be multi-layered mist. Would that be? Yeah. Is it Yai Zakura? Yai Zakura is a Japanese cherry blossom that has several layers of petals. And that idea of multi-layered mist, I think is so so wonderful because, like I said, this time in Japanese history is so complex, and you have aspects that are really wonderful opportunities for women to feel empowered and to feel liberated and to feel heard. You also have other layers that are about militarism and the country descending into a xenophobic political stance, which sounds a lot like our country nowadays. And you see ways in which the country is opening up and developing more technology. You also see the way in which the woodblock print industry is collapsing and the term ukiyo-e is dying, and the Edo period concepts of beauty, the Edo period aesthetics are being abandoned because they're considered old-fashioned. It's a very multi-layered time in Japanese art history. And I just want to say thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you so much to Alejandra for joining us and contributing, and for putting together this amazing exhibition of Mary Cassatt that inspired me to do this rotation.
You're much too kind. The only reason that exhibition is really awe-inspiring in our Honolulu iteration. The exhibition is wonderful, has been in Philadelphia and San Francisco, but what is really adding a twist is Stephen's help and support and insight. So do come when he talks to Lauren Gerber, the expert in print and works on paper at the Philadelphia Museum, because that conversation is going to be
August 8th.
August 8th. That's going to be amazing.
August 8th. Can you sign up now?
I'm signing up, but it's going to be brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, if you need to ask me any questions after we're done today, feel free to pass on those questions to me, and the best of luck with your tours, and thank you all for your hard work.